and welcome to Down the Spirituality and Science Rabbit Hole, podcast number 13, entitled God and Creation, Just Who or What is God? It has been said that one's religion does not necessarily formulate one's concept of God, but rather, one's concept of God informs one's religious philosophy, including theology and the use and interpretation of Scripture. So let's get started. Here we see graphically three different concepts of God. The first on the left is deism. This is where the universe and the world lie outside and separate from God. God created the world and is separate from us, and he doesn't intervene in the world. In the central one is panentheism. This is where God is contained within the universe and the world, but a part of him remains transcendent and outside of the world. The last one is on the right, and this is pandeism. And this is where God is completely contained within the universe and the world. In other words, God is everywhere in the world and doesn't lie outside of the world. So the last two that we talked about, panentheism and pandeism, would be considered pantheistic, where God is considered a fundamental part of the universe that he created. So now that we've introduced some concepts of God, let's look at the universe. A scientific appraisal of our universe appears to indicate that it is a result of an informed creation event, which is the Big Bang, and not a creation due to random, arbitrary events. A universe with life that comes into being by random processes appears to not be an option for three important scientific reasons: the fine-tuning of the physical universal constants, the DNA code, and the fact of early life on Earth. The idea of an intelligent designer of the universe by an intelligent God creator seems somewhat tedious, so let's call it an informed creation. Let's apply a new idea for a universe that came into being with a certain amount of information embedded in it, and at the start of the Big Bang, which then evolved into the universe we know today. Some entity placed all necessary information into the creation event that then developed and evolved over time into the universe we see today. The success of science in understanding the macroscopic, microscopic, and cosmological worlds has led to the strong belief that it is possible to form a fully scientific explanation of any feature of the universe. However, in the past 20 years or so, our understanding of physics and biology has noted a peculiar specialness to the universe, a specialness with regard to the existence of intelligent life. This sends up warning signs from the Copernican principle, which is the idea that no scientific theory should invoke a special place or aspects to humans. To understand this specialness, consider three important points: fine-tuning, the code-like nature of DNA, and the early appearance of life on Earth. So let's consider the fine-tuning of physical constants. These are constants such as the strength of the strong and weak nuclear forces, the electromagnetic force, the gravitational force, and also things like Planck's constants and others. There's somewhere around 15 to 18 of these that all appear to be very finely tuned to produce a universe in which life can exist. We see in the chart here, with the "we are here," our universe occupies a very tiny space. If we change any of these constants by even a fraction of a percent, we wind up with no universe. there seems to be an awful lot involved in producing the universe that we see today. The diagram here shows just two examples of fine-tuning physical constants. The strong force coupling constant holds particles together in the nucleus of an atom. If the force was weaker, then multi-proton particles would not hold together. Hydrogen would be the only element in the universe. If stronger, all elements lighter than iron would be rare, and we also wouldn't have any radioactive decay. The second force, the electromagnetic coupling constant, determines the strength of the electromagnetic force that couples electrons to the nucleus. If less, then no electrons held in orbit. If stronger, electrons would not bond to other atoms. Either way, there'd be no molecule. And these are graphically displayed here. So the take-home message here is we live in a very special fine-tuned universe that appears to have been made just right, sometimes called the Goldilocks universe. The constants are just right for the production of intelligent life and the universe as we know it. Next, let's consider DNA. DNA is the basis of all life on Earth, at least. DNA I'm trying to be very simplistic here. DNA is a molecule that consists of basically, think of it as a sentence. It's got 4 letters that make up words. And each word is comprised of 3 of these 4 letters. And these are the letters that call for amino acids that make up proteins. So it's got a number of known parts. Now, is it possible to produce DNA from random events? And the answer is a pretty solid no. And the reason being is we can calculate statistically from the 4 letters that make up a DNA word, we can calculate the probability of how each could form. And what it amounts to is even the DNA in a very simple single-cell organism is so large that the ability for DNA to have formed randomly is almost impossible because there just isn't enough time for random events to cause that. This is very similar to the analogy of you put 100 monkeys in a room and have them on typewriters. And given enough time, those monkeys just randomly striking keys can produce the work of Shakespeare. And statistically it is possible, but the key element is time. There's not enough time in the known universe, which is roughly around 13 billion years. There's not enough time for the random production of DNA. Secondly, DNA is a code. What do we mean by a code? A code is something that is developed by someone. In other words, I develop a code. Now, the only way anything can understand that code is for me to tell them how the code was assembled. So a code indicates a creator that made the code, and then the recipient of that code, which must be taught what the code means. The important point here is codes can only be made by an intelligence and understood by another intelligence. In the history of science, we know of no randomly natural developing code. They simply don't exist. Codes are only something that happens through intelligence. Lastly, is the appearance of life on Earth. The Earth is roughly 4.5 billion years old. It was uninhabitable by life for at least the first 500 million years. Basically, the surface of the Earth was molten, volcanoes, totally inhospitable to life. It was only after the Earth cooled and water condensed to form the oceans, that life was possible. That took about 500 million years to happen. Now, the first fossilized single-cell life that we know of dates back to 3.7 to 3.8 billion years. That means the first life on Earth appeared very early and very shortly after the Earth cooled enough to have liquid water on the surface. So that means if you run the numbers, if life appeared 3.7 to 3.8 billion years, and the Earth wasn't physically an acceptable environment till 4 billion years, that means only 200 million years are there between no life and the first cellular life. That is not even close to enough time for single-cell life to have evolved or for even DNA to have formed. Therefore, this leads people to posit a possible panspermia event where life came in on a meteorite or a comet and life was already present and got spread to the Earth in a panspermia event. But again, that doesn't leave much room for error. No matter how you slice it, it just doesn't appear that with these three topics that we've discussed, there has been long enough, or the statistics are just against having it developed randomly. It just doesn't appear to be in the cards. We are going to start off with a little Kabbalah, and we'll be using the Kabbalistic text of the Zohar. The word Zohar means splendor or radiance. The Zohar book is a foundational work of Jewish Kabbalistic literature. It is a group of books which include commentary on the mystical aspects of the Torah, as well as material on mysticism, mythical cosmology, and mystical psychology. The Zohar contains discussions of the nature of God, the origin and structure of the universe, the nature of souls, redemption, and the relationship of ego to darkness and true self to the light of God. The Zohar Pritzker edition commentary present the first translation ever made from a critical Aramaic text of the Zohar, which has been investigated by Professor Daniel C. Matt based on a wide range of original manuscripts. It consists of 12 volumes and took over 20 years to research. Utilized in this podcast are two selections from the Zohar regarding Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Mystical literature is filled with both linguistic and logical contradictions, as well as nonlinear thought lines that can be very frustrating to a modern reader. There is much mystery involved. This mystery is not so much a problem to be solved as it is an enigma to be appreciated. As a result, one doesn't read the text as much as one experiences the text subconsciously. Like poetry, it must be read again and again with, shall we say, a relaxed mind, then savored in those nooks and crannies of the mind. Now, in this discussion of creation, there is a Genesis chapter 0, verse 0, or what was God doing before the creation? Because what better place to start a discussion about what is God than at the beginning of both God and the universe? So we are going to start with the first verse of Genesis and its interpretation by the Jewish mystical practice of Kabbalah. By mystical, we mean anything that enables one to make a direct, usually emotional connection to God. The Hebrew word Kabbalah means receiving, or that which has been received. The Zohar is a medieval Kabbalistic text which offers a detailed commentary on the inner meaning of the entire Torah, starting with before the creation, actually. Okay, we are at the point now where I'm going to have to pronounce Hebrew words. So for those Jewish people listening, a little forgiveness, please, because I'm sure I may mangle them here. But the first 6 Hebrew words of the Torah as written in the text are Breshet bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. Okay. A direct translation of these words gives us Breshet, meaning either in beginning or with beginning, bara, meaning created, Elohim, meaning God, ha-shamayim, meaning heavens, with ve'et, meaning and ha'aretz, meaning earth. Here, the proper name for God, Elohim, is attempting to convey the essence of God as a primordial, infinite space, the universe. As we will see presently, this is where the reference to the palace comes from in the upcoming Zohar passage that I'm going to read. Put it all together, and you get the grammar as related to subject and object in Genesis 1:1 is vague and open to interpretation. The typical Christian King James translation above exchanges the order of bara and Elohim so that God becomes the subject doing the creating. This yields, in the beginning, God created. However, in Kabbalah, it insists on reading the words as originally written, thereby transforming Elohim, God, into the object of creation. This means that the subject doing the creating is unnamed. We get, with beginning, blank or nothing, created Elohim. This is the proper and direct translation, since the true subject for the emanation of creation is unnameable. Here, Elohim denotes both God as well as the universe, which emanated from blank or nothing. In the primal state, nothingness is emanated, undifferentiated being, a blank, neither this nor that, the infinite pregnant nothingness of becoming. In Kabbalah, the Ein Sof is the name for this hidden source of all creative emanation, the pregnant infinite. The Ein Sof is what existed before God, literally pregnant nothingness. It is important to note that all of the divine names, whether in Hebrew or any other language, provide merely a tiny dim spark of the hidden light for which the soul yearns for when it says the word God. So now we get to how the Zohar interprets Genesis 1:1. One should feel the contradictions of the text and try not to think too much about their meaning. This is perfect subject matter for those meditative moments when contemplating who or what is God. This requires training for those of us with a Western worldview, which is hopelessly addicted to logic and reason. The Zohar says, "When the king conceived ordaining, he engraved engravings in the luster on high. A blinding spark flashed within the concealed of the concealed from the mystery of the infinite, a cluster of vapor in formlessness, set in a ring, not white, not black, not red, not green, no color at all. When a band spanned, it yielded radiant colors. Deep within the spark gushed a flow, imbuing colors below, concealed within the concealed of the mystery of the infinite. The flow broke through and did not break through its aura. It was not known at all until, under the impact of breaking through, one high and hidden point shone. Beyond that point, nothing is known. So it is called beginning. The enlightened will shine like the Zohar of the sky, and those who make the masses righteous will shine like the stars forever and ever. Zohar, concealed of the concealed, struck its aura. The aura touched and did not touch this point. Then beginning emanated, building itself a glorious palace. There it sowed the seeds of holiness to give birth for the benefit of the universe. Zohar, sowing a seed of glory like a seed of fine purple silk. The silkworm wraps itself within, weaving itself a palace. The palace is its praise, a benefit to all. With beginning, the unknown concealed one created the palace, a palace called God. The secret is, with beginning, blank created God. If you read this through once and think you're confused, welcome to the club. So read it again slowly and throw away all logic and try to feel the words. Another passage from the Zohar says, Ein Sof does not abide being known, does not produce end or beginning. Primordial nothingness brought forth beginning and end. Who is beginning? The highest point, beginning of all, the concealed one abiding in thought. It also engenders end, the culmination of the word. But there, no end, no desires, no lights, no sparks in that infinity. All these lights and sparks are depending on it, but cannot comprehend. The only one who knows, yet without knowing, is the highest desire, concealed of all concealed, nothingness. And when the highest point and the world that is coming ascend, they know only the aroma as one inhaling an aroma in sweetness. Sometimes a picture can be used with words to try and convey the mystical. Consider the picture here. It is called the Flammarion engraving and was created as a wood engraving by an unknown artist, but its name, because it was first documented appearance, is in a Camille Flammarion book in 1888. The engraving depicts a man, or a seeker, clothed in a long robe and carrying a staff, who kneels down and passes his head, shoulders, and right arm through a gap between the star-studded sky and the earth, discovering a marvelous realm of circling clouds, fires and suns, and things beyond the heavens. One of the elements of the area beyond the cosmos bears a strong resemblance to traditional pictorial resemblances of the wheel in the middle of a wheel described in the visions of the Hebrew prophet Ezekiel. This picture shows the entire universe as it was understood by the Jews at the time the Torah was written and compiled. The known universe consisting of many ascending layers of heavens above the earth. These multiple heavens were very well known by Jews of Jesus' time and are described in the 3 Jewish books of Enoch. Saul talked about Enoch's third heaven, the realm of divine creatures and unspeakable mysteries, that was the subject of one of his many esoteric visions. Here also is rendered the eternal metaphorical ideal of both the scientific and the mystical seeker who quests for knowledge of what is beyond the cosmos, the infinite Ein Sof. But the infinite concept of the Ein Sof is beyond human comprehension. Long before the Zohar was written, Jesus addressed the subject of beginnings in the Gospel of Thomas. This gospel is nothing more than a collection of Jesus' mystical teachings given to and studied by his inner circle of disciples. As such, they sound a lot like the Zohar, but while the Zohar was not written until the Middle Ages, the practice of the mystical Kabbalah did exist before the time of Jesus. Unlike the Jews that balk at even saying the sacred name of God, let alone imagining God to be a man, Christianity thrives on the anthropomorphic God. Because of its Greek heritage, there is a very strong tradition in Christianity for picturing God as a person, usually as a kindly old white-haired man, or perhaps God as Jesus with a halo. There is a basis for the old man God in the book of Daniel, where the Ancient of Days is mentioned. It took Michelangelo to solidify the picture of God as a man with his depiction of the creation of Adam on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Now, while Jesus did refer to God as Father, as an Orthodox observant Jew, he would not have had sympathy for any depiction of God as a man. He used the phrase Father in heaven is both a metaphorical and an imagery, not an actual physical description of God. Both Kabbalah and the Zohar go to great lengths to ensure the disciple does not infer or form any mental construction of God as a human being, or for that matter, a physical anything in either appearance or characteristics. Now here are two logions, or sayings, of Jesus from the Gospel of Thomas. The first one, Logion 18, and by the way, here it uses Jesus' Aramaic name of Yeshua rather than the name Jesus. Thomas, Logion 18. The disciples said to Yeshua, "Tell us how our end will come." Yeshua said, "Have you found the beginning then, that you are looking for the end? You see, the end will be where the beginning is. Congratulations to the one who stands at the beginning. That one will know the end and will not taste death." Logion 19 is similar to this. Yeshua said, "Congratulations to the one who comes into being before coming into being. If you become my disciples and pay attention to my sayings, these stones will serve you. For there are five trees in paradise for you. They do not change, summer or winter, and their leaves do not fall. Whoever knows them will not taste death." So let's look at creation from some other religions. Notions of beasts and trees and rivers and thunderclouds having a spiritual existence all of their own, combined with the idea that people's own deceased ancestors had spirits that lingered on in this world, some more powerfully than others, led to the first progression of religion, the belief that the more powerful spirits had ultimate authority over some domain, such as one spirit with the power over the flow of all rivers. In due time, ancient mythologies came to express the idea of a world created from the physical substance of a destroyed deity, a necessary predecessor idea of the philosophy of pantheism. An example is the 5,000-year-old Sumerian myth of the young god Marduk slaying elder goddess Tiamat and creating the world from her body. Marduk stood over Tiamat's vast corpse and decided to create a new world. He split her body into two to form the arch of the sky and the world of men. Next, he devised the laws that would keep everything in its apparent place. Order must be achieved. Perhaps the most pantheistic of these early ideas comes from the Georgia and Society Islands of the South Pacific, whose people provide the tale of Ta'arora, a primal idea of divine unity, a lone godhead far above the other denizens of this polytheistic pantheon. A poem by those holding Ta'arora as their creator states, "He was, Ta'arora was his name. He abode in the void, no earth, no sky, no men. Ta'arora calls out, but not answers, and alone existing, he became the universe. The props are Ta'arora, the rocks are Ta'arora, the sands are Ta'arora. It is thus he himself is named." The first foray into the next progression, from these polytheistic ideas to monotheism, happened nearly 3.5 millennia ago in Egypt under the reign of the pharaoh Amenhotep IV. The idea of primary matter derived from an original spirit as found by the ancient Egyptians to be an early form of pantheism. And this pharaoh in particular believed that there was but one true and supreme deity, of which all others were simply pale reflections, and this was Aton, originally the god of the sun disk. In worship of this one true deity, Amenhotep changed his name to Akhenaten, which means beloved of Aton. Akhenaten created an entire city named Amara in which to celebrate his newfound monotheism. The area of Amara today is an extensive Egyptian archaeological site containing the remains of what was the capital city of the late 18th dynasty. The city was established in 1346 BC, built at the direction of the pharaoh Akhenaten, and abandoned shortly after his death in 1332 BC. The name that the ancient Egyptians used for the city is transliterated into English as Akhenaten, meaning the horizon of Aten. Akhenaten not only changed his own name to incorporate Aten into it, but decreed that the names of other false gods were to be scratched out, their images all destroyed. Atonism was enforced for 2 decades by decree of the pharaoh, but the whims of man denied this newfound cult life beyond that of its progenitor. After Akhenaten's death, those left in power quickly abandoned the belief, but the influence of the cult of Aten may well have been preserved and passed on to other cultures in the religion as evidenced by the word Adonai, today a chief name of God in Judaism. Many scholars trace the Jewish monotheistic belief back to Akhenaten's followers' migration to the east into the area of future Israel. Indeed, many scholars today think that the story of Moses may well be an evolution of the story of Akhenaten, simply reformulated into the Jewish culture. Before we fall into the common trap of assigning the origin of all thought to the Western world, we must be mindful that the Rig Vedas and its successor, the Upanishads, the divine texts underscoring Hinduism, may themselves have been hundreds, possibly thousands of years old by the time of Moses. The Vedas were born from a clash of early civilizations some 37 centuries ago. Inhabitants of the Indus Valley, who had established themselves earlier than 2000 BC, encountered the Aryans of what would later be called Iran. The Upanishads, commentaries on the Vedas, did evolve a distinctive conception of Godhead that transcends the gods but is found to be intimately present in all things. The Bhagavad Gita, described by many scholars as the deepest scripture in the world, is the most famous chapter of the Mahabharata, one of the 2 major Sanskrit epic poems. Here, the great warrior Arjuna, accompanied by his charioteer Krishna, is engaged in an epic battle of the Kurukshetra war between the Kauravas and the heroic Pandavas. A brilliant archer, Arjuna knows he will easily slaughter many of his evil cousins on the battlefield. But tired of the battle, he desires to give up violence altogether. Krishna persuades Arjuna against retiring from the fight, for it is a predestined cleansing of evil. To persuade Arjuna, Krishna reveals his true self, the unity of all things and all beings in all times and all places. All things are shown to Arjuna to be one and to be part of the Creator, which has itself become a great and universal idea played out throughout our lives. Arjuna is part of the Creator, and so he is the same as everyone whom he is fated to kill. This too echoes the primary thrust of pandeism, the creator of our universe, in fact, becoming our universe, rationally motivated by a need to share in the experiences of beings coming in to exist herein. So, let's move a little bit closer to home here. There are the 9th century works of Johannes Scotus Erigena, who derived a pandeistic formula which answered some of the riddles surrounding the Christian God. Erigena was among the first to propose not only that God became our universe, but in an even more revolutionary arc, that God did so intentionally in order to attain knowledge which otherwise remained beyond God's grasp. I'll quote Erigena here in, "When we hear that God makes all things, we should understand nothing else but that God is in all things, therefore is the essence of all things. For he alone truly is, and everything which is truly said to be in those things which are, is God alone." He also wrote, "Since God is not a being, he is therefore not intelligible." And finally, he wrote, "This means not only that we cannot understand him, but that he cannot understand himself as well. Creation is a kind of divine effort by God to understand himself, to see himself in a mirror. Erigena's view of God is revolutionary. In the broad physical sense, God is changeable, able to undergo a complete transformation through which one form is utterly, if temporarily, abandoned in favor of another form." Erigena's account of the God-world relation is ultimately ambiguous. The world is created by God, and so is other than God. The world is also eternal, for it is not outside God. Its logos and primordial causes are in God. It participates in God, and God participates in it. And it will ultimately be assumed back into God, where God will be the final all. We come then to Giordano Bruno, born in 1548. He was not precisely a deist, but he was influenced by the writings of Erigena to become a pantheist. Believing as he did in a sort of Stoic God who was the sole origin and end of the universe. And a century after Bruno, Baruch Spinoza would take the argument even further and another step to explain that we were in the body of God, an immanent God, but that God had been existent when our universe had not, and so God was transcendent as well as immanent. God was the Logos, and at the same time maintained an existence beyond the Logos, and since God was infinite, each existence was infinite. Spinoza fared better than Bruno for his efforts. Bruno was burned at the stake. His tongue was nailed to the roof of his mouth to prevent him from uttering any more heresies. Spinoza was only excommunicated. His death actually came from lung disease attributed to his work with glass. Sir Isaac Newton, contemplating the nature of our universe, was concerned that, and I quote, "was not space itself somehow divine, possessing as it did the attributes of eternity and infinity?" End quote. Newton answered this question in an essay on the gravity and equilibrium of fluids, likely produced around 1670. According to Newton, and I quote, "Since God is infinite, he must exist everywhere. Space is an effect of God's existence, emanating eternally from the divine omnipresence. It was not created by him in an act of will, but existed as a necessary consequence or extension of his ubiquitous being. In the same way, because God himself is eternal, he emanates time. We can therefore say that God constitutes that space and time in which we live and move and have our being." The possibility that our universe itself is both boundless and exclusive, that it fills up all that may exist, then gives rise to pantheism or pandeism. What the deist sees as a distinct substance, the pantheist regards as modes of a single substance. Finally, Benjamin Franklin and the deist political leaders and theorists of the American Revolution and Enlightenment believed in a creator whose works were accessible by reason rather than by revelation, and a creator who has not predetermined our world and does not intervene in it. So I will end on a humorous note. We have a little cartoon here on the history of religion, starting out with magic rocks, stone circles like Stonehenge. We then go to having magic animals that have powers. Then we go to magic invisible animals in the sky. Those animals are replaced by invisible people in the sky. Then we go to fewer invisible people in the sky. Then we have people who claim to have come from people in the sky. And lastly, we have people who claim to speak for the people who have claimed to have come from the sky. So we go from megaliths to shaman to early Jewish polytheism and late Jewish monotheism, early Christology, later Catholic Christianity, and finally Protestant Christianity. I'll leave the final frame interpretation of the cartoon to each individual to make up their mind what growing up actually is.